I guess the comforting notion here is that to the flat earthers, Australia doesn't even exist. Hi, my name is Sydney. Welcome back to my channel. I get asked all the time about the differences between America and Australia, particularly in relation to political and social attitudes. It's actually kind of disconcerting how many people don't know things about us, like where we are in the world and that our seasons are opposite to the United States. I don't know, maybe the flat earthers are right and we don't really exist. Needless to say, let's have an education session about my tiny, but also not so tiny, island nation. Before I get into this, it's probably worth saying that people have a tendency to overstate the similarities between the two countries. Like really overstate. You know, it's like we're distant cousins. We're sort of same, but different. What's super interesting to me is that the Inglehart-Welzel cultural map, which is based on data from the 2010 World Values Survey, places Australia the farthest away from America in relation to other English-speaking countries when you take into consideration our different value systems. It seems that the fundamental difference in the values comes down to the emphasis on a secular rational value system in Australia and an emphasis on the traditional value system in the United States. This is not my opinion, it's according to this data and this map, so don't yell at me. Needless to say, apparently everyone likes lists these days, and who wouldn't? I love it when numbers are numbered. So let me just reel off some pretty major differences that I can see between America and Australia politically. You come from a land down under. The first is religion, weirdly enough. My darling grandma, who is a hardcore Catholic, once referred to Australia as a godless nation. It wasn't very nice, but I don't hold it against her. But honestly, objectively, Australia really does not have a very strong religious base. While a lot of people probably identify as some sort of Catholic or Christian denomination, the reality is that your average person isn't practicing. Despite the fact that we do have Judeo-Christian roots, just over 52% of the population identify as some denomination of Catholic or Christian, whereas 30% of the population identify with no religion. If you compare this to America, over 70% of the American population identifies as some denomination of Catholic or Christian. So according to everyone else, we are godless and we don't exist. Love it. Anyway, observationally, I would say that this means that Australians don't have a very strong traditional religious conservative bent on their viewpoints. A really simple example of this that comes to mind, and you guys are gonna laugh, is swearing. If you come to Australia, you will hear so much swearing. It is exceedingly common to hear this on television and radio as well from the speakerheads and personalities who are on these various shows. It doesn't really get bleeped out. It doesn't get bleeped out, I don't think. I don't think I've ever heard swearing be bleeped out here.
On the issue of the carbon tax, he's Australia's biggest artist.
Full of Thank you.
What a bunch of gutless pricks they are.
And people aren't super offended if they hear you say a naughty word. It's basically just part of our DNA. And I know now that the comments section is going to be filled with Australians using the C word and explaining how it's a colloquial term that you use to describe a friend, which is a thing here. Yes. Number 2 is Australians have to vote. Voting in Australia is compulsory, meaning that you must vote in your state and federal elections. And if you don't, well, you are getting a nice fine in the post. Yes, the government will take your money if you don't vote for them. I kind of made that sound like we have some sort of dictator or like government that never leaves. We don't. They just like to fine us for everything. Anyway, in our last federal election, 95% of eligible Australians voted. In America, on the other hand, voting is not compulsory. In the 2016 federal election, only 135.7 million people voted. That's a little less than half the total population. I'm just thinking that if America fined people for not voting, I mean, they'd make a killing out of it, but I think that people would also say that it's racist. Because that's where America is right now. That's racist! Number 3 is Australia doesn't have a Bill of Rights. You heard that right, folks. Australia does not have a Bill of Rights or any real piece of specific legislation that protects our freedoms. In our Constitution, on the other hand, we do have 5 rights that are explicitly protected. Although they are super weird. I love that freedom of religion is one of our explicitly protected rights, because you know, apparently, Australia is not a godless nation. America, on the other hand, has an actual piece of legislation, their Bill of Rights, that protects their rights. All of them. Or at least most of them. These rights are very clearly stated, they are very important to Americans, and they're most often upheld by the court system. But I think the difference between Americans and Australians really comes down to the way that we conceptualize our rights and freedoms. Granted, through all of this, parts of this could just be my perspective, and I'm sure there are Aussies who would disagree with me, but it seems as though Australians are quite happy to give up their freedoms for a sense of perceived security. America, on the other hand, seems to be a society that is built around the individual and individual freedoms, and because they are so skeptical of the government and authority, it seems like as soon as their rights are trampled on in any small or significant way, Americans get really, really mad. So mad, they revolt against the government. Number 4. You guys knew that this was coming, let's be fair. Australia does not have a Second Amendment, which is kind of obvious considering I just told you that we don't have a Bill of Rights. I've talked about this before in a number of other videos, but Australia does not have a Second Amendment equivalent. It means that our gun laws are fairly strict and pretty regulated. Super regulated. Australia is really good at that regulation. The government's just like, haha, you're having fun? Let me regulate that. Just like their other rights and freedoms, it seems like Americans view gun ownership as a political issue and a natural right. Firearms in America seem to be a pretty significant symbol of freedom and independence and the opportunity to fight against government tyranny. No such ideology really exists here. Firearms in Australia are basically just seen as firearms. Most Australians don't own them, they don't use them, they don't view them as a means or a method of self-defense, and they definitely don't view them as a natural right. Your average Aussie has a tendency to view our firearm laws favorably, and most of the time they do see firearms as something that should only be used in specific situations. Compared to the United States, where it's pretty un-American to question the right to bear arms. Australians are not like Americans at all towards firearms, especially in the sense that you get people that are like, I live in the bush. I'm gonna go down to the bayou and shoot me some gators. Oh, I love gators. I love eating them and putting them on my wall.
You should have bought a gun instead of a beer, mate.
Moving along. Number 5, patriotism. There's probably 3 days out of the year, not including sports matches, just by the way, where you will see Australians walking around in the Australian flag, wearing our national colours, green and gold, and that's it. The main day you will see people do this is on the 26th of January, which is our Australia Day, which is like our 4th of July equivalent. Besides that, you will have a really, really hard time finding Australian flags on houses, government buildings, out in public, in shops, in restaurants, and so on and so forth. It's just not really a thing here to actively display your patriotism and nationalism for the country. American flags are honestly everywhere in the United States. They are all over buildings, all over houses, and people just seem very outwardly excited and outwardly proud to be an American citizen. In a way, it's almost un-American to not be super proud to be American. It's not that Australians aren't proud to be Australian and that they don't love being Australian, it's just that they're less inclined to show it. I found an article that said that 90% of Australians have pride in Australia, and yet I found other statistical data that said that only 34% of Australians think that our country is the best country in the world. That compares to 41% of Americans who believe that their country is the best country in the world. When I was younger and in primary school, we used to sing the national anthem every single Monday morning, but that's basically as far as it went. And in terms of pledging allegiance to things, Australians do not pledge allegiance to the country or the flag. It's just very uncommon to hear these concepts in this country. And if I'm perfectly honest, in Australia at the moment, if you refer to yourself as a patriot, it's kind of a dirty word. The media likes to paint people who call themselves as such as far-right or alt-right, or just generally paint them in a pretty negative light. When I was looking for facts and stats for this video, I found this, and it seemed pretty interesting to me. Where Americans generally swear allegiance to the flag or country, Australians swear allegiance to our mates. Mateship is far more important and sacred for Australians than patriotism. I know I've gotten like a little bit off topic here, but I would say that this is a really, really interesting concept and not one that I would necessarily disagree with, because mateship in Australia is definitely a cornerstone of this society, or at least it used to be in days gone by. In Australia, the concept is a little bit like, we love our bread, we love our butter, but most of all, we love each other. Whereas Americans are like, I own 45 million fireworks and I done gone shot a gator. Ha ha, America!
America first.
Last but certainly not least, our attitude towards the military. It's fairly clear, even objectively, that Americans are aggressively, lovingly supportive of the military. It is, without question, a cornerstone of the country. It is something where most people will show respect to soldiers when they see them in the streets. They'll happily donate towards soldiers or the military or what have you. And there's this big respect that is shown towards the military in America. So my cousin took me to this hockey game in Colorado, and this soldier surprised his family. It was like a Star Wars themed night. It was interesting. Anyway, this soldier surprised his family, and I think he was dressed as Yoda, and then everyone cried, and I cried, and it was a beautiful, touching moment. But that stuff does not happen in Australia. I wouldn't say that people don't support the military, but I wouldn't say that the support looks the same as American support. Here, again, it's just not that overt. Today, the public's connection with the army is largely exercised through abstract or ceremonial means. Anzac Day continues to capture the public's imagination, as is demonstrated by the growing attendance at dawn services. This, however, has not translated into greater appreciation for the tasks and objectives of the institution. Australian society lacks an anchor by which to make sense of its own modern army. For context, Anzac means Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. These are the people who fought in Gallipoli, who fought in World War I and in World War II. The two major days that Australians will celebrate the soldiers is Anzac Day and Remembrance Day, and on these days people will buy pins because they sell pins to raise money. People will go to these dawn services, they will be respectful, they will march in the marches that we have, but like I said, outside of that, we don't really talk about the military. Friends of mine in the military have told me that they don't tell people that they're in the armed forces because the reception is usually quite cold, or people just generally don't care. Like I said, people don't really thank them for their service, and there certainly aren't any perks of being in the military like there are in America, where there are a lot of discounts that soldiers can get, or even veterans can get when they've served or when they're currently serving in shops and restaurants and so on and so forth. I asked a very good friend of mine who's in the Navy what he thinks about all of this, and this is what he said. I think overall people view the military fairly kindly, but apathetic, like who cares kind of thing. Anzac Day is very special for me, but most of the year I understand that the military doesn't really matter. We aren't Americans who are like, oh my god, the army saved us, oorah, and that's okay. Most Aussies appreciate the services, including fireys and ambos. So in Australia, we shorten everything, and fiery is a firefighter, and an ambo is an ambulance paramedic driver. I guess the way that Australians are towards the military is kind of like how my dad is. Like, he'll never tell you that he loves you and that he appreciates you, but if you want a cup of tea, he'll make it. And that wraps it up, friends. Obviously, I left out a ton of differences because no one wants me to make a 30-minute video talking about this. So if you would like more videos on this topic, please let me know because they're super fun to make. And I want to share a little bit of me with the rest of you. It's like mashing my worlds together, and I like that. Lastly, I just want to say that I am not saying one way or another that one country is better or worse in the way that they operate. They're just different. As always, if you like the video, hit subscribe and the thumbs up button. If you want to leave a comment, feel free to do so, just don't be rude about it. And I will see you guys next time.